Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers attending court proceedings, suspicious activity, and public property, and is brought to us by North Dakota News Now's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. On August 23, 2019, North Dakota resident Derek Collier was leaving a local grocery store when he was asked to show his receipt. Mr. Collier refused, and the employees called the Minot Police Department to have him removed from the property. Officer Josh Lunt responded to the call and trespassed Mr. Collier from the store. This interaction sparked Mr. Collier's interest in law, and he began regularly attending court proceedings in Minot to learn more about the legal process. Eventually, Mr. Collier's curiosity led him to attending hearings in neighboring cities. And in early February of 2020, Mr. Collier drove to the nearby town of Williston to tour their city building and attempt to watch any court proceedings taking place. Upon arriving in the lobby of the building, Mr. Collier made contact with Deputy Royce Crone, who is an officer of the Williams County Sheriff's Office, but is in charge of the building's security. Mr. Collier asked Deputy Crone if there were any court proceedings taking place, and the deputy told him that there were none. Mr. Collier continued into the building and began wandering the halls and exploring areas of the building that were open to the public. A few minutes later, Mr. Collier was confronted by Deputy Crone, who informed him that he was growing suspicious of his activity and told him that he had 10 minutes to exit the building. Mr. Collier then continued to the third floor of the building where he discovered a court proceeding taking place and decided to observe the trial. Deputy Crone then made a call to 911.
Regional dispatch.
Hey, it's Royce over at the courthouse.
Hey.
You don't have any officers available to assist me in checking the guy out, do you?
Yeah, I do.
I've got a really big boy up here, and he's really acting kind of strange, just walking around the whole place, but I'd feel better confronting him if I had a little backup.
Yep, I will send one over there right now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Once officers Brett Flesness and Michael Licciardi arrived on the scene, the three went to the courtroom to make contact with Mr. Collier.
What's going on?
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
So, what's your business here today?
Oh, I'm going to look at court.
Just look at court?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, sitting in there.
Okay, well,
You sitting there?
I don't know what I'm sitting in there for.
That's why I'm asking.
You told me there was no court today.
This is a court that's got nothing to do with you.
It doesn't matter.
This is a civil trial.
It doesn't
So
matter.
why are you doing it?
You can be in there
How
and
come
watch
you were
any court
walking
you want.
around the building and
Because I've
going
never
in
seen this
everywhere?
court. I'm from
Huh?
Minot. Like I was
Yeah?
telling the lady downstairs.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you're just wandering around, sitting in a courtroom where you don't know anything that's going on?
Yeah. Why can't you?
Huh?
What amendment is that? The Fourth Amendment? If
I
I'm
don't
not
know if
mistaken?
I'm not going to quote amendments.
So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to
just
sit
gonna
and
wonder,
watch.
And you're going to be civil, because if you're not,
Did I,
then
was
there's
I
gonna be
in there?
problems.
Was I in there not being
No,
civil?
I'm just telling you what's
I'm
going to
telling
happen.
you.
No, I'm telling you what's
No,
going
I'm
to happen.
telling you what's going to happen.
No,
I'm in there.
I'm
watching
telling you
court.
what's
I'm
going to
telling
happen.
you.
Hey,
You're going to go in there. If you're going to go in there, you're going to be quiet. Go down here. Go down here.
Although the First Amendment does not explicitly mention the right to attend criminal proceedings, the Supreme Court has upheld this notion in the past. In the 1980 Supreme Court case of Richmond Newspapers, Inc. versus Virginia, the court held that the First Amendment generally prohibits closing criminal trial proceedings to the public. However, the court also recognized that this right is not absolute, and some limitations may apply under certain circumstances. This conclusion led the court to develop a two-pronged test to determine when the right of access should be granted for a particular proceeding. First, a court should consider whether the process or place at issue has historically been open to the public and the press. The court generally recognizes that the, quote, tradition of accessibility implies the favorable judgment of experiences, and it is noted in several opinions that certain proceedings that were public in England and colonial America should remain so today. Second, the court has looked at, quote, whether public access plays a significant positive role in the functioning of the particular process in question. The right to access a courtroom may be overcome by showing that closing the proceeding preserves a higher interest to the parties involved, and that the closure is narrowly tailored to serve that interest. Before a trial can be closed to the public, a trial court must exhaust all reasonable alternatives to the closure and make specific findings detailing the need for it. All that said, the Supreme Court has not ruled on the public's right to access civil trials, but several state and lower federal courts have recognized that the openness of civil trials is also necessary to promote free participation and communication within a democratic society. Despite the ruling of lower state and federal courts, civil proceedings may be closed for a variety of reasons, including the need to protect the party's privacy, confidential business information, or trade secrets. It is important to note that the Supreme Court has not recognized a right of public access to juvenile proceedings, which have traditionally been closed to the public. Some state courts, however, have allowed access to certain juvenile proceedings, particularly if the defendant is charged with murder or another serious felony. It should also be noted that although the Supreme Court has not yet directly addressed the issue of recording inside a courtroom, most federal district and circuit courts have held that the First Amendment right of access does not extend to audio-visual devices inside the courtroom. Because the court proceeding that Mr. Collier is attempting to attend is a civil trial, public access could be limited if necessary. However, it appears as though the trial was open, considering that the door to the courtroom was propped open. Officer Crone also did not contact Mr. Collier because he was attending court, but because he considered Mr. Collier's actions suspicious.
Let's walk around this corner. Around the corner.
I had no problem with you being in there, but if you're starting in there, we're going to be back and you're going to be going to jail.
Didn't I ask
No,
you
do you understand what I
downstairs?
said? Do you understand what I said?
I asked
Do you understand what I said?
I asked you if there was court today, and you told me no.
This is a civil trial.
It doesn't matter what it is. I can
doesn't
go in
matter.
there. That's
It's
why
none of
there's
your
benches.
business.
You can go see it.
It's
It's
none of your
public.
business.
It's public,
It's
so
none
it
of
is
your
my
business.
business.
So why did you go to every office?
Why can't I?
Huh?
What's the
Why?
big deal?
Why is your
Why
problem?
can't I?
Why you
Because people don't normally do that. They don't come in here and go to everybody's places.
walk all over the place for no reason at all?
I'm not most people. I'm going in
I'm
there,
finding that out.
and I asked you if there was court today, and you told me no.
Right, there is
Because
no
I like
court.
to go in mine a lot and go watch court.
Yes,
So
I
when there's
have
court
the
session, for what?
I want to see your identification.
For what law?
I want to see your identification.
What?
I'm
For
asking
what?
you as a peace officer for some ID, so I know who I'm
For
talking
coming and seeing?
No, 'cause
My-
you're in my
look,
building.
My name's Derek,
I
and this
need
is
your-
our building.
I need your information.
It's our building.
Derek, let's not, okay, I'm gonna step in here, okay? Okay, we got security here, right? We've had security concerns in the past, okay? That's what we have. You're right, it is public, okay? But when you're going from room to room, that's unusual, okay? Which is why he's checking on you.
And that's
Now-
okay.
Now listen, because that's suspicious activity, we're investigating, that's what we're doing, okay? Now, because of that, you do have to identify yourself, because we're investigating a suspicious act in a government building, okay? So if you ask for identification, you do have to provide it, okay?
Okay, and why, I don't understand. Like, I go in there and you pull me out when I'm legally
We're
okay to go in
We're
there?
checking to see what's going on, we're investigating.
I'm legally fine to go in there
Yeah,
and
but
watch
we want
court.
to
And
make
you
sure
can
that
pull me out?
we're
Really?
just seeing what your intentions are and what's going on.
For a legally okay act. No, it's not suspicious.
Although North Dakota is a stop and identify state, an officer must still obtain reasonable suspicion before demanding a citizen to produce identification. I have covered the topic of reasonable suspicion in many of my other videos, so I will not spend too much time on it in this episode. But it is important to understand that a location's history and context does play a role in the acquisition of reasonable suspicion. For example, the Supreme Court has routinely ruled that a history of criminal activity in certain areas can contribute to an officer's justification for reasonable suspicion. In the 2000 Supreme Court case of Illinois versus Wardlow, the court acknowledged the relevancy of a high crime area in regards to reasonable suspicion, and decided that, quote, the determination of reasonable suspicion must be based on common sense judgments and inferences about human behavior, and that the Fourth Amendment, quote, accepts the risk that officers may stop innocent people. In the case, William Wardlow was in an area known for narcotics trafficking, and upon spotting nearby officers, began running from them, although the officers did nothing to provoke his flight. The court held that being in a high crime area in and of itself is not suspicious, but the location, in combination with Mr. Wardlow's unprovoked attempt to flee from the officers, did meet the minimum standards required to stop and detain him. The logic applied in the Wardlow case boils down to whether the actions of an individual are suspicious given the context of the location they are in. For example, if Mr. Wardlow had run from officers in an area that joggers often frequent, instead of an area associated with the trafficking of narcotics, then his actions would have been much less suspicious. Given that Mr. Collier aimlessly wandered the halls of the city building before entering the courtroom, and that the officer mentioned having security issues in the past, it is entirely possible that a court would consider his actions suspicious enough to warrant an intrusion by the officers. And this interaction could have ended after Mr. Collier willingly presented his identification and a reasonable explanation for his actions. But it did not.
It is to me.
Me and you don't have the same options of what's suspicious. What's suspicious to me is you pull me out of court when I'm in there watching, not being loud. Sir, I let you talk. No, you're not going to shush me. I let you talk. I'm in there watching court and you have me come out here so they can run my ID. I'm in court and I'm sitting and being civil, not making any noise. And I asked you downstairs, was there court today? You told me no. And then you're like, well, it's none of your business. It's public. So it is my business. I can go in there and I can watch just fine.
Now it's my turn. You came in the building, all right? You're just walking around. You're going to every office
and you
and
can't do
everything.
that?
For no reason at all. All right? We have security concerns in here. People just don't walk around.
I'm not most people.
I'm talking now. Remember, it's my turn. Most people don't talk, don't walk around and go to every office and checking out everything. That is not a normal thing to be done. That is suspicious to me. That's why these gentlemen are here. All right? This is a civil trial. You have no reason really to be in there. There's no reason to be in there.
Any courtroom,
okay?
watching what's going on.
You're giving me an attitude whenever I ask you something, then you're going in there. My security concern is that you might start something in there. I've got a full place full of people.
I'm sitting there being civil and quiet so that your security concerns goes right out the window.
That's where you return.
Yeah.
That's how we're checking on you, okay? But
I just don't understand why.
I don't understand what your problem is.
You're in my building.
This is our building. This is a public building, not your building.
It's my building.
Public, it's not your
security.
building. It is not your building. So quit saying it's my building.
You're in my building.
It's not your building.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
I am security here. It's my building.
It's
I'm
not your building.
responsible for this building.
Okay, and when I came
checking on
in,
anybody that's suspicious.
and I'm not suspicious, you are suspicious. Treat me like a criminal when I'm not. When they come back and nothing is in my record, let's go. Let's go public.
No, let's go downstairs.
Let's go public
Let's
right
go
now.
downstairs.
All right, let's go.
As mentioned previously in many episodes of ATA, it is possible to be trespassed from public buildings, and the courts generally consider the property of a state or municipality to be the property of another for the purposes of trespassing. In the 1966 Supreme Court case of Adderley versus Florida, the court held that the United States Constitution does not prohibit a state from controlling its own property as long as it does so in a non-discriminatory manner, and the logic of the Adderley ruling has been applied to many cases. For example, in the 1968 California Court of Appeals case of Parish versus Municipal Court, the court held that if the surrounding circumstances are such as to indicate to a reasonable man that such person has no apparent lawful business to pursue, then they may be trespassed from public property. The question of the First and 14th Amendments being violated was addressed further in the 1970 Federal District Court case of Hurley versus Hinckley, where the court held that physical presence in a building which is dedicated to specific public uses other than that of a public thoroughfare is not pure speech and not protected by the Constitution, and is thus a trespass. Not only have the courts historically granted the controlling parties of public buildings significant leeway to dictate who may remain on the premises, but have also given them the ability to determine whether a citizen's business on the premises is legitimate. If a court were to determine that Mr. Collier's actions were in fact suspicious, then it is possible that the court would consider him to be trespassing. All that said, Mr. Collier made his intentions clear from the moment he entered the building, and if a court were to uphold his actions as suspicious, it could render considerable implications on a citizen's First Amendment right to attend public hearings.
Come on, downstairs.
For what?
Huh? So we're not disrupting this court.
I'm done disrupting. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to go in there.
We can talk.
I'm done talking.
Come on downstairs.
Officers, I'm done. I just want to go in there. I want to sit.
Well,
this is a county building,
Okay, and it's public. We know
If
that.
you're not here for court and they don't want you here, they can do that.
Mr. Collier was led downstairs by the officers and was eventually forced to leave the building. After going back and forth with the officers outside of the building, Mr. Collier eventually left the scene without further incident. Following the encounter, Mr. Collier filed a complaint against Deputy Crone with Sheriff Verlan Cavandi and requested copies of the body cam footage and the 911 call. Upon contacting him a second time, Sheriff Cavandi assured Mr. Collier that he had spoken to Deputy Crone about the incident and corrected his conduct. Mr. Collier also contacted several attorneys regarding his interaction, but was unable to secure legal representation. Overall, Deputy Crone gets an F. for maintaining a hostile and condescending demeanor throughout the interaction, failing to employ any measure of de-escalation, and allowing his ego to dictate his conduct. Deputy Crone's antagonistic attitude was nothing short of unprofessional, and although he may have had a legitimate reason for contacting Mr. Collier, there is no excuse for a member of law enforcement to engage in an ego battle with a citizen, especially in a hallway outside of an active courtroom. Whether or not Deputy Crone's suspicion was warranted is debatable, but his attitude and actions overshadowed the validity of his stop and highlight his inability to exercise his authority objectively. Even if the deputy's suspicion was found to be valid by a court, that would not substantiate his aggressive behavior or combative speech. Officers Flesness and Licciardi get a C+, because although they blindly followed the logic of Deputy Crone upon responding to his call, it could be argued that Mr. Collier's actions were suspicious, and that Deputy Crone did retain the authority to remove him from the building. It is difficult to fault the officers for removing an individual from a building at the request of the building's authority figure, and there is an ample amount of case law to justify their actions. Police officers are not judges, and they are simply tasked with carrying out their duty to the best of their ability, and allowing the courts to decide whether their actions were within the bounds of the law. All that said, officers are afforded a considerable degree of discretion when carrying out their duties, and instead of attempting to find a solution that favored all parties involved, the officers chose to restore peace at the expense of administering justice, thus depriving Mr. Collier of his First Amendment right to attend a public trial. The waters of law enforcement are often difficult to navigate, and it is all too common that officers choose the quickest way to resolve an issue rather than the most equitable. Mr. Collier gets an A for remaining relatively calm in the face of Deputy Crone's accusations, maintaining a balance between complying with the orders of the officers and voicing his concerns about the stop, and following up this encounter with the proper legal action. As mentioned earlier, the legitimacy of Deputy Crone's suspicion is debatable, and if this interaction were to be challenged, a court would have to weigh the validity of the deputy's suspicion with Mr. Collier's First Amendment right to attend public trials. As demonstrated in many episodes of ATA, it is extremely difficult to preserve your emotional stability when interacting with members of law enforcement. But Mr. Collier did a great job of defending his actions without becoming emotionally charged. I commend Mr. Collier for taking a genuine interest in the legal process and for managing to keep a level head throughout the interaction. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.